My mother-in-law invited me to a gala dinner, but when I saw her spit into the roast, I realized she wasn't just trying to ruin my meal. She was trying to ruin my life. Little did she know, she had just handed me the key to her total destruction. The roast beef was succulent, perfectly medium rare, and rested on the bone china platter like a prize. It was the centerpiece of the annual Miller Family Gala, an event my mother-in-law, Eleanor, treated with the gravity of a papal coronation. I had spent 3 days meticulously planning the menu, ensuring every garnish was placed with geometric precision. I was standing by the sideboard, adjusting the silver gravy boat, when I saw it. Eleanor didn't think I was watching. She had drifted into the dining room under the guise of checking the candles, her silk dress rustling against the velvet curtains like a snake in dry grass. She stood over the platter, her eyes darting toward the hallway where my husband, David, was busy pouring wine for his brother. With a movement so practiced it made my blood run cold, she leaned down, lips pursed, and projected a thick, viscous glob of saliva directly onto the center of the roast. She didn't stop there. She smoothed it over with the back of a silver serving spoon, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She turned, caught my gaze, and froze. Her expression didn't shift to guilt or apology. Instead, a slow, thin smile stretched across her face. She whispered, "It's been too dry for years, dear. I thought it needed a little personal touch." I felt the room tilt. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the jazz music drifting from the living room. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the platter across the floor. I stood there, clutching the gravy boat until my knuckles turned the color of bone, watching her walk past me with a sickeningly triumphant tap of her heels. As she reached the door, she paused and glanced back. "Don't tell David, darling. You know how he hates a scene." I stared at the spot on the meat where she had deposited her hate. My entire life with this family, the years of swallowing insults, the quiet dinners where she critiqued my career, my clothes, and my lack of breeding, crystallized into a single terrifying clarity. She didn't just want me out of the house. She wanted to break me. I waited until the guests arrived. I watched them serve themselves. I watched Eleanor take the very slice she had tainted, lifting the fork to her lips with a dainty, mocking grace. As she chewed, she looked directly at me from across the table, her eyes glinting with the thrill of her secret power. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had forgotten that while she spent her life guarding her social standing, I spent mine working in the legal department of a firm that specialized in estate litigation. I knew where she kept her files. I knew the password to her private study, and I knew exactly how much the estate was worth. I excused myself from the table, claiming a sudden migraine, and headed straight for the library. I needed the original copy of her will to see if the rumors about the charitable trust were true, or if she really had cut David off entirely as a final punishment for marrying me. I reached the mahogany desk, pulled the hidden lever beneath the wood, and watched the drawer click open. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against the cold leather folder. But as I pulled it out, the sound of a heavy footfall echoed behind me. "Looking for something, dear?" Eleanor's voice was right behind my ear, cold as a winter grave. "Or did you forget that I changed the locks on the safe yesterday?" I didn't turn around, though every instinct screamed at me to bolt. I held the leather folder, the weight of it suddenly feeling like a lead brick. Eleanor's shadow stretched long and thin across the desk, blocking out the light of the banker's lamp. She wasn't just standing behind me, she was looming, a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "The locks," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "are just a mechanical deterrent, Eleanor. They don't account for the fact that you haven't updated your filing system since 1998. I could hear her shallow, rhythmic breathing. She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive, clinical perfume, lilies and ozone, choking the air. She reached out, her beringed fingers tracing the edge of the desk near my hand. It was a calculated intimidation tactic, the kind she used to make junior associates tremble. But tonight, the nausea of the roast beef incident had curdled into something sharper, something metallic and cold. "You have such a vivid imagination," she murmured, her voice dripping with a faux maternal concern that made my skin crawl. "Is that why you're snooping? Because you think you're in the pages of this book? Let me save you the trouble of reading the fine print. You aren't in it. You never were. David is a legacy, but his wife? You're just a temporary inconvenience, a smudge on the family crest that I've been trying to buff out since the engagement party." She leaned in, her breath hot against my neck. "Do you know what happens to people who touch things that don't belong to them in this house, Sarah? They become incidents. A missing heirloom, a misplaced document, a sudden tragic fall down the grand staircase. Accidents are so much easier to explain than long-term grievances." I finally turned to face her, clutching the will to my chest like a shield. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes reflecting the dim light like a wolf's. I realized then that she didn't just hate me, she was terrified of what I might find. The rumors I'd heard about the estate weren't just rumors, they were a roadmap to her ruin. "You're scared," I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "You aren't worried about the roast. You're worried about what I'll do when I find out why you're so desperate to keep David away from his inheritance." Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a strength that belied her age. She squeezed until my nerves screamed, forcing me to drop the folder. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, sliding halfway under the heavy velvet armchair. "I am the Miller family," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "And you are nothing but a footnote. If you think you can dig up the past and use it against me, you have no idea who you're dealing with." She shoved me back, hard, causing me to stumble against the bookshelves. As I tried to steady myself, I caught a glimpse of the desk. My cell phone, which I had left charging there, was gone. In its place sat a small, ornate key. The key to the secondary safe in the basement, the one that held the real records of the family business. "Go ahead," she laughed, a low, jagged sound. "The dinner party is over, and the guests are leaving. Why don't you go down to the cellar and look? See what's waiting for you in the dark." I watched her walk toward the door, her composure restored, her back perfectly straight. She paused at the threshold and flipped the light switch. The room plunged into darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight cutting across the floor. "I suggest you choose your next move carefully, Sarah," she called out into the void. "Because once you open that safe, there is absolutely no going back to the life you think you have." I stood in the silence of the library, my heart hammering against my ribs, and heard the distinct, final of the heavy door locking from the outside. I wasn't just trapped in the library. I was being beckoned into a trap she had set years ago. And then, from the floorboards beneath my feet, I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of a heavy metal door groaning open, as if someone, or something, was waiting for me to descend. The darkness was absolute, smelling of cedar and decaying secrets. I didn't reach for my phone. I knew it was gone. Instead, I fumbled in the gloom, my hands finding the heavy brass handle of the secret passage hidden behind the shelves, the one Eleanor had been so confident I'd use. The floorboards groaned in protest as I descended the narrow, stone-walled staircase that bypassed the main hallway. Each step felt like walking into the gullet of a beast. When I reached the bottom, the air turned frigid. My pulse was a frantic bird trapped in my throat. I clicked on a small, emergency flashlight I kept in my purse, and the beam cut through the dust, landing on the secondary safe. It wasn't tucked away. It was centered in the room like an altar, illuminated by a single, flickering bulb. The key Eleanor had left was already in the lock. I didn't hesitate. I turned it, the mechanism heavy and rusted, and the door swung open with a shriek of metal. There was no money. There were no deeds to property. Inside the safe were stacks of medical records, all bearing the name David Miller, dating back 20 years. I started flipping through them, my vision blurring. These weren't just medical charts. They were psychiatric evaluations, altered documents, and prescriptions for high-dose sedatives. The very same sedatives I'd noticed in Eleanor's medicine cabinet that she'd claimed were for her nerves. The final page was a power of attorney document, dated only 2 weeks ago, signed with a shaky hand that looked eerily like David's, granting Eleanor absolute control over his assets, his residency, and his medical decisions. My breath hitched. David wasn't just a legacy to her. He was a prisoner in his own life, sedated and controlled, kept in a fog so she could drain his trust fund to pay for the mounting debts of her own failed investments. The dinner party hadn't been a gala. It had been a performance to keep up appearances for the creditors arriving tomorrow. "I see you found the truth," a voice echoed from the top of the stairs. I whipped the flashlight around. Eleanor stood at the top of the cellar steps, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. She held something behind her back, her posture relaxed, almost casual. "Did you think he married you because he loved you, Sarah?" she asked, her voice calm, chillingly conversational. "He married you because he needed a buffer. He needed someone else to blame for his episodes when the drugs wore off. Someone else to take the fall when the bank finally comes to collect. You aren't his wife, you're his scapegoat." I moved toward the stairs, trembling with rage. "You drugged him. You've been poisoning him for years." "I've been managing him," she corrected, descending the first step. "And tonight, I'm finalizing the management. You see, the bank doesn't just want the money. They want a reason for the bankruptcy, a scandal, something public, something messy." She stepped into the light, and I saw what she was holding. It wasn't a weapon. It was a glass of wine, the same vintage we'd served upstairs, and a small, translucent syringe. "David is upstairs, sound asleep," she said, taking another step down. "And you? You're about to have a very public breakdown. I have the security footage of you stealing from the safe, and I have a suicide note that you've been writing in your head for months. The only thing missing is the toxicology report that will prove why you finally snapped." I backed away, hitting the cold stone wall. The basement felt smaller, the air thinner. I searched for an exit, but there was only the way up, and she was blocking it. "Why tell me?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "If I'm a scapegoat, why tell me the plan?" She stopped halfway down, a cruel, satisfied smirk on her face. "Because, dear, the police are already on their way. I called them 10 minutes ago. I told them my daughter-in-law had broken into my study and was acting erratically in the cellar." Suddenly, the house above us erupted with the wail of sirens. The flashing blue lights began to dance against the high, barred windows of the cellar. Eleanor didn't look worried. She looked exhilarated. "You have 5 seconds to choose," she whispered, her eyes wide and manic. "You can drink the wine and pass out peacefully, or you can face the police with a blood alcohol level that will put you away for a decade. What's it going to be, Sarah?" As she held out the glass, I heard the heavy front door upstairs being kicked open and the booming voice of an officer shouting, "Police! Is anyone home?" Eleanor took a step toward me, the syringe poised, but as she stepped on the uneven concrete, her foot slipped. She lurched forward, and in that split second of her loss of balance, I didn't reach for the wine. I reached for the heavy iron handle of the basement's coal chute, a narrow, terrifyingly steep drop that led directly to the alleyway outside. I grabbed her arm, not to steady her, but to shove, and as we both tumbled into the chaos of the shifting floor, I realized the chute had been tampered with. It was open. And as we fell, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the distinct thud of the exterior bolt being locked from the outside. We weren't just trapped in the cellar anymore. The chute door slammed shut above us, sealing us both in the pitch black as the heavy, rhythmic thumping of boots began to descend the main stairs, heading not for the library, but directly toward the cellar door. The darkness in the coal chute was suffocating, a pressurized tomb of coal dust and ancient, stagnant air. Eleanor's gasp was cut short as we slammed into the pile of debris at the bottom. The sound of heavy boots above us, the police, had stopped right at the cellar door. My heart was thundering so hard against my ribs, I thought it would shatter my sternum.
"They won't find us down here," Eleanor hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic, animalistic edge. She was scrabbling at the stone walls, her manicured nails clicking against the rock. "I have a contingency. I have the power, Sarah. Do you hear me? I built this family." I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling, and found the small, jagged piece of metal I'd swiped from the library desk before the door locked. A letter opener. I had been clutching it so tightly it had drawn blood from my palm. The metallic tang in the air wasn't just the coal. It was my own life force, and I refused to let it end as a footnote in her ledger. "You're finished, Eleanor," I whispered, the words scraping out of my throat. I didn't just look at the will. I recorded our entire conversation while you were gloating. I pulled out my backup digital recorder, a tiny device I always carried as a lawyer, which I had activated the moment I stepped into the library. It was tucked into my inner coat pocket, the light still blinking a steady, vengeful red. Eleanor froze. The sound of the police tearing down the cellar door upstairs echoed like a cannon blast through the floorboards. "You little..." She lunged for me, her hands clawing for my throat. I didn't back down. I jammed the metal letter opener into the wooden support beam of the chute, creating a wedge that prevented the lid from being fully secured by the mechanism she'd triggered. A sliver of light from the street lamp outside bled into our trap. "Officer!" I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. "Help! We're down here! She's trying to kill us!" The boots above hammered against the wood. The cellar door splintered. In that moment, Eleanor's composure finally fractured. She wasn't the regal matriarch anymore. She was a cornered animal, her face smeared with coal dust and hatred. She grabbed for the syringe again, but I swung my arm, catching her wrist with the edge of the recorder. The glass shattered against the stone wall, the liquid spilling out, not medication, but a clear, viscous poison. The chute lid flew open. A blinding beam of a flashlight cut through the dark, followed by a frantic face. "Police, stay where you are!" I scrambled up, hands raised, blood and coal dust coating my skin. Eleanor tried to scramble behind me, her voice switching instantly to a practiced, trembling plea. "Officer, thank God. This woman, she's deranged. She's been trying to harm my son. She locked us in here." I held up the recorder. "She poisoned the wine, officer, and she's been drugging her own son for 20 years to strip his assets. It's all on here." The lead officer looked from her to me, his brow furrowed. He took the device, his thumb brushing the play button. Eleanor's own voice filled the coal chute, cold, calculating, and damning. She was describing the incidents, the sedative dosages, and her plans to frame me for a suicide. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her unraveling life. "Eleanor Miller," the officer said, his voice hard as iron. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and the poisoning of a dependent. Turn around. Now." I watched, breathless, as they cuffed her. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the police. Her eyes were fixed on the mansion, her empire of lies crumbling around her. She was led away in silence, the queen of the house dragged out into the cold night air as a common criminal. David was found in the master suite, groggy but alive, the sedative effects finally wearing off as the paramedics pumped his stomach.
When he finally stood, shakily, and walked out of the house, he didn't look for his mother. He looked for me. The legal battle that followed lasted months, but the evidence was insurmountable. I didn't just get my freedom. I spent every cent of the estate I inherited, after the creditors were satisfied, to ensure that the charitable trust Eleanor had used to hide her money was permanently redirected to the very causes she had tried to ruin. I sat on the porch of a small, quiet house miles away from the Miller estate, holding a cup of tea. No roast, no silverware, no pretense. I looked at the scorched paper copy of her will I'd saved from the fire. Across the signature line, where she had once demanded control, I had scrawled a single, final note. The house was empty now, the gates were locked, and for the first time in years, the only thing I could hear was the wind through the trees. I didn't miss the grandeur. I didn't miss the wine. I just watched the sun rise, knowing that for the first time, the story was finally mine to write.